The frost came into Cold Harbour on the 12th of December, the way a hard winter comes into a small holding, which is to say, without any interest whatever in what could be spared. It came at night, and it did not lift. By the fourth day, the beck had gone quiet under its lid, and the pump had to be thawed each morning with a kettle, and the peat stack that had been meant to see out February had a hole in the side of it the size of a man. There were 9 houses along that lane under the moor edge, and a chapel with no glass, in 2 of its lights, and a barn at the top end, that had been a good barn once, and now had a north gable with a crack in it, a hand's breadth wide, running from the eaves to the tie beam, which anybody who knew barns could read at 40 paces. Wilhelmina Rooke could read barns. She was 26, and everybody called her Mina, and had since she was a child. She was small and brown-haired, in a cloak the color a slate roof goes in rain, turned once and dyed once, and the dye had not held across the shoulders. Her hands were cracked at the knuckles from the pump. Her eyes were gray and level, and gave back exactly what they were given. She had 11 ewes and 4 hens and a byre cow, and a grandfather of 81 who could not get further than the fire, and the barn at the top end was hers, and on the evening of the 15th, she was up a ladder in the last of the light with a lantern, looking at the crack, when the man came into the yard. He was tall, in a coat that had been a good coat, before 4 days on the moor, and he had walked from the turnpike, and he asked, civilly enough, whether he might sleep in the barn. She came down the ladder. She looked at him for 1 second, 2, 3. No, she said. And then, before he could take it as what it sounded like, she said the rest of it. Not for want of charity, that gable is split from the eaves down, and the beam end has gone soft, and I have had 11 ewes out of it since Tuesday, and put them in the byre, and if the wind comes round easterly in the night, which it will, that roof will be in the yard by morning. You are welcome to the fire in the house, and the settle by it, and my grandfather will talk your ear off, and there is a bowl of what there is, and you will have to hear about the war. But you are not sleeping under that, he said, after a moment. You went up a ladder to look at it. Somebody has to, said Mina Rooke. The barn does not care who does the looking. He slept on the settle. He gave his name as Mr. Ash. He was in fact the Duke of Cardrew, who owned 11,000 acres of that moor, and every one of the 9 houses in that lane, and the barn she had just refused him. And he had come up alone in a bad coat, because he had learned in 5 years that the moment a place knows what you are, it stops being itself. Old Ambrose Rooke, 81, blind in one eye and sharp in the other, listened to the man say his name, and said nothing at all, and thought his own thoughts, and kept them where he kept everything. The wind came round easterly at 2 in the morning, and the north gable of the barn at the top end went into the yard, and in the morning they stood and looked at it, the 2 of them, in the gray light, with the slates lying about like a dropped hand of cards. He did not say anything about having been going to sleep in it. Neither did she. What Mina Rooke had not told a living soul in 5 years was that she knew exactly why that barn had never been repaired, and had the figures for it in a ruled book under a loose board, and had had them for 4 years, and had done nothing. Her father had been Josiah Rooke, wright and timber framer of Marbury, 30 years at the trade, and he had been finished in the year 20 at a hearing over a barn at Marbury that came down in a gale on a boy of 11, when a gentleman had stood up and said, mildly, regretfully, that Rooke's framing had been at fault, and that he had been uneasy about it at the time. It was not true. It was said pleasantly, and it was not true, and it took her father 16 months to die of it, and he left her a framing square of steel and brass, worn bright at the corner by 30 years of his thumb, and one saying she had heard since she could walk. Measure it twice, and write the number down, and then no frightened man alive can talk it out of you. The gentleman at the hearing had been Mr. Lambert Quainton, who was, and had been for 11 years, the agent for the Cardrew estate. So Mina had come back to her grandfather's holding under her mother's name, which was Rooke, her father's having been Rooke Halliwell on all the papers, and she had gone about that moor with a framing square in her apron for 4 years writing things down. The crack in the gable, measured 11 times, the date the estate's men came to the chapel roof and left the same day, the timber that came up the lane in carts and went past the barns it was meant for. 4 years, and she had done nothing with it, because a woman with 11 ewes and a blind grandfather does not go to a duke. We'll take a very short break. If you don't want to miss new stories, please subscribe to the channel. He came back in the January in his own coat, with 2 horses and a groom, and Mina Rooke was at the pump with a kettle and did not curtsy, and said, "You had better stand out of that wind, it comes round the corner," and went on thawing the pump, and he stood and let her, and said afterwards that it was the only welcome he had had in 5 years that had not been arranged 3 days in advance. He had been a duke since he was 27. His brother had died in the December of the year 20, in a barn on the estate's own land that came down in a gale, going in to fetch a horse out, and the barn had been on the repair list for 2 years and had stood in the accounts as reframed and paid for in the June of that year. He had never looked at that page. He had signed whatever was put in front of him every quarter since, because reading it meant seeing the entry, and the entry meant knowing. He told her that in the chapel porch in the February, with the sleet coming off the eaves, and Mina Rooke did not say she was sorry. "Then read the books," she said. "You have paid a man 5 years' wages for the privilege of not knowing, and it is the most expensive thing on this moor." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, the almost. He came up the lane 9 times between January and April, and it was never called anything, and what they did was work. The gable, the chapel lights, the peat. She gave him the framing square and he read the numbers off it and she wrote them down. And old Lady Verity Cardrew, 81, his aunt, who lived at Marbury on 400 a year and a spine like a poker, drove up in the March because she had heard her nephew had been seen carrying slates, and she spent 11 minutes with Mina Rooke and formed her opinion in the first of them. "You are not what I expected. I am sorry to disappoint you, my lady." "I did not say I was disappointed. I said you are not what I expected, and there is a great difference, girl, and you had better learn to hear it. You keep a book." "I do." "Then get it witnessed by somebody respectable before somebody makes you produce it. You are being looked at now, and when a woman is looked at, the looking does not stop at the part she chose." Lambert Quainton came in the last week of April. He was 50 and pink and pleasant, and smiled a great deal. It was the same muscle. He found her in the yard. "Miss Rooke." Josiah Rooke's girl, 4 years on his Grace's land under half a name, with a grievance and a book. He looked at the new gable. "You will be asked what you are, my dear, and you will say a smallholder, and then somebody will observe that a woman whose father was found culpable in the death of a child has contrived a great deal of private access to a grieving man. His Grace holds his audit at Cardrew on the 9th of June. Be gone before it, and there is nothing said at all." And Mina looked at the pink, pleasant face and saw the fear under it for half a second, and understood he had not come about her father. He had come because a woman with a framing square had been measuring his barns. She had 6 weeks, and she used them at night with the door barred and 1 rushlight, because a half-built case can be laughed away and a finished one cannot. She had the ruled book, 4 years. She got from the timber merchant at Marbury, in his own hand, and signed the tally of what Oak had gone to Cardrew in 11 years, which was 1/3 of what had been charged. She got the marks of 6 men who had carried sound timber past the barns it was billed for, and into a yard at Marbury that was Quainton's own. She got the slater's book for the chapel, and she got, laid open on her grandfather's table by the Duke himself in the May, the estate account for the year 20, with £110 entered and paid in the June for the reframing of the barn at Sled Gill, 6 months before it came down on his brother. She copied it all fair, twice, and checked her columns twice, and said the totals out loud to the empty room, because a number said out loud cannot be argued away by a frightened man. The audit sat in the long room at Cardrew on the 9th of June, 61 men at the tables, and the tenants standing at the back. Quainton laid it out beautifully. He had a duty that gave him no pleasure. There was a young woman present, a Wright's daughter, whose father had been found culpable in the matter of the Marbury barn, where a boy of 11 died. She had lived 4 years on his Grace's land without declaring it. She had lately contrived a most remarkable degree of access to his Grace, and he was very sorry, extremely sorry, and supposed nobody could be blamed but the woman herself, since it was in the nature of such people to get in where they could. 61 faces turned. Mina Rooke stood up and found that the dread of a thing is nearly always larger than the thing. "Every word Mr. Quainton has said is true," she said, and her voice went the length of that room without her lifting it. "My name is Wilhelmina Rooke Halliwell. My father was Josiah Rooke, Wright, of Marbury, and he was ruined at a hearing by that gentleman's opinion and died of it 16 months after. I came back to my grandfather's holding because there was nowhere else, and because Mr. Quainton was here. I did not say so, and that was cowardice, and I do not defend it. And since I am to be looked at today, you shall have the rest of it. £110 stands entered and paid in this estate's book, in the June of the year 20, for the reframing of the barn at Sled Gill. The timber merchant at Marbury has written and signed that no oak went to Sled Gill that year, or any year since. 6 men have made their marks to carrying estate timber past the barns it was billed for into Mr. Quainton's own yard, and it is stacked there this morning, and any man here may ride out and look at it before dinner. That barn came down in the December on his Grace's brother, and it came down because the beam ends had gone and nobody had put a ladder up to look." Lambert Quainton laughed. It was small and pleasant, and it was the worst thing he could have done, and he knew it before it was out of his mouth, because no man laughs at a column of figures. And in the silence after it, the Duke of Cardrew came the whole length of that room and stood beside her and said, to the table, in the flattest voice in England, "The lady has my accounts because I gave them to her. In December, I asked a woman on this moor to let me sleep in her barn, and she refused me, and she was the only person in 11,000 acres who had gone up a ladder to find out why. Send for the timber merchant." What followed took until dark and was not lovely, and there was a night in July when the Duke stood with a pen and every intention of writing to 9 men who would have finished Quainton by Michaelmas, and Mina put her hand flat on the paper. "Send him to the law and not one letter," she said. "He can answer at the bench, where there are figures and witnesses, and a man may reply. But my father was finished by a pleasant remark at a hearing, with nothing behind it that could be weighed. And I will not begin that same thing over in the other direction and call it justice, because it happens to be my turn. And he did it because he was frightened of being poor. I have been frightened of being poor for 4 years, and I did secret things about it too, and mine happened to be honest, and that is luck as much as virtue. So it went to the assizes, and Quainton made restitution of about 1/3, and the Duke made up the rest, and counted it cheaply bought. 19 barns on that estate were surveyed in the autumn by a Wright from Marbury, who was paid what the work cost, and 11 of them wanted beam ends. The chapel was glazed for £4. He wrote to the bench at Marbury over his own name and seal, laying the Marbury barn business before them entire, and in the December the finding against Josiah Rooke was withdrawn as unfounded, and he had it printed in the Marbury paper and paid for it, and read it aloud twice at the fire, once for Mina and once for her grandfather. He waited until every shilling was settled, so that there should be nothing left between them that could be mistaken for a debt, and then he came up the lane in the following December, with his sleeves already back. "There is nothing owing," he said. "Your father's name is his own, and it was mine to put right. My aunt has offered your grandfather a house at Marbury for life. Whatever you say to me, and it is his regardless, and I have put it in writing so you cannot mistake me." He turned the framing square over in his hands. "You would not let me sleep in your barn. Nobody in 11 years has refused me anything, and not one of them was thinking about my neck when they said yes. Will you marry me? On one condition," she said. "Name it. Every barn on this estate is looked at once a year by somebody who goes up a ladder and is paid for the going up. Not by me, for as long as there are barns." A year on, in the December, with the frost hard again and the pump wanting a kettle, the Duchess of Cardrew went up a ladder at the top end of a lane under the moor edge, with a lantern and a framing square, and looked at a gable that had been sound for 11 months, and came down and wrote the number in a book. A woman had told a cold stranger he could not sleep in her barn, and it had sounded like the meanest thing in the parish, and it was in fact the only kindness he was offered that winter. What a refusal means depends entirely on what the person refusing has taken the trouble to know. Almost nobody takes the trouble, which is why almost nobody can tell the difference. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.